Welcome to another episode here at the Masculine Health Solutions Podcast. Today, I had the honor and the privilege to interview Joshua Shea. He is a coach, an author, and somebody who has conquered his addiction to porn himself. He also conquered alcoholism, and he basically gets into what the root causes of these issues were, and now has turned his life around and is coaching others. And he has experience dealing with clients whose issues range from infidelity, emotional affairs, sex, and porn addictions. So guys, you definitely want to stay tuned for this one. All right, without any further ado, let's jump right in. Before we get started, one more thing. If you want to get any PE gear, be sure to check out TotalManShop.com. That is TotalManShop.com. And use the promo code MHS2020. Promo code is MHS2020 and get 12% off. Be sure to check out their wide variety of all kinds of good quality PE equipment. All right? And that's promo code MHS2020 for 12% off. And the website, once again, is TotalManShop.com. Welcome to another episode here at the Masculine Health Solutions Podcast. Today I have Joshua Shea, and we will be talking about porn and how he recovered from his addiction, how you can do it as well, different strategies that you can do, and basically just going in depth on how it affects society and the effects on the brain that a lot of people don't want to discuss, but it's definitely something that we as men should address because it's prevalent and it's only getting worse. And I got two boys, and obviously it's something that, I'm going to have to talk to them about eventually. So I think it'd be awesome to talk to an expert. So Josh, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you, how did you basically take down this monster? How did you get rid of your addiction? And just give us a quick synopsis, man.
Yeah, I love sharing the story, and I want to thank you for inviting me on the show, CJ. Ultimately, I'm not that unique when it comes to your story of porn addiction. Most porn addicts who are males, and this has been proven in a couple studies, most of us have one of the three major forms of repressed trauma because of abuse. Usually it's because of sexual abuse, it's because of physical abuse, or it's because of mental/emotional abuse. In my case, I had a babysitter when I was very young, probably between the ages of 3 and 6, maybe 3 and 7. And I experienced, I was taken care of by her in weekdays when my parents were at work before I went to school. And then she took care of me after school once I got old enough, and my little brother too. I experienced sexual abuse there. I experienced probably even more mental and emotional abuse. And I started to successfully repress it at 12 years old when my older cousin showed me hardcore pornography for the first time. And I tell you, it was like I didn't need years to become addicted. I didn't need to ramp up. I was addicted 15 seconds after I saw it. It was like a warm rush came over me, and I knew that I had just found something special. The only other time I've ever felt that was 2 years later when I was 14 years old and I got drunk at a wedding for the first time. And suddenly I'm like, oh, I see why people do this. I mean, yeah, it tastes like ass, but oh my God, I feel cooler. I feel funnier. I'm better looking. I'm dancing like you don't care. And I suddenly realized why people drink. And after that day, I would guess that less than 10% of my days until I was 37 years old and got myself into treatment, I would guess that there was less than 10% of days where I didn't use alcohol, pornography, or more likely both. From 14, 15 years old, straight up to 37 when I entered into my first rehab. And it didn't matter if I was in high school or college or at the beginning of my career or moving along. It didn't matter if I was dating or if I was engaged or when I got married. Didn't matter if my kids were here. Didn't matter if my parents were being supportive or not. None of that mattered because I always had alcohol, and I always had pornography. And I knew that no matter what was happening in my life, those were two things I could fall back upon to make me feel better. And you don't notice that you're becoming an addict, or you don't know that you are an addict often until it's way too late. I never knew that I was a porn addict until I actually, in 2014, I went to rehab for my alcoholism. And after about 6, 7 weeks there, my caseworker asked if I would see a certified sex addiction therapist off campus. And I was like, well, why? And he's like,
Yeah.
you've got some attitudes towards sexuality. You talk about your use of pornography. I think, I'm not very strong in this area. I'd like you to talk to him and just maybe he can untangle some things. And I went to him several times my last few weeks in rehab out in California. And this guy helped me realize that porn addiction is a real thing, that I,
Yeah.
in fact, had porn addiction, and that it had predated my alcoholism and was probably even, I was able to account for even more trouble in my life because of the porn addiction than the alcohol addiction. But the reality is, I don't think that even when I went into that first rehab for alcoholism, I didn't know porn addiction was a thing. I'd never heard the term before. This was 2014. So I got out of my alcohol rehab, came home, hooked up with a therapist, started to try to research it because my job for most of my life has been as a journalist or as an
Yeah.
editor. So I'm a big research guy. I'm the type of guy who can read the New England Journal of Medicine and be like, "Hey, this is great," and other
Break
people
it
are like, "Yeah,
down.
that's Greek." Much like if I'm trying to read Shakespeare or something like that.
Yeah.
So I decided uh, since there wasn't many materials out there for people who were porn addicts, written at a level that was more like a newspaper level than a
Yeah.
graduate college level. I thought, I've been there. I can write. I can create some resources, and
Okay.
I started to do that. And then I started to segue a little bit into the betrayal trauma category because that's what the partners of porn addicts tend to have to deal with because we hide pornography so much and so well because of the taboos that surround it. So now I split my time largely between coaching porn addicts and their partners who have been betrayed, finding out that their partner was either a porn addict, perhaps that there was some infidelity, something going on there. And then I work with them as couples after I work with them as individuals
Yeah.
for a little while and try to build things back because a lot of people just don't understand the difference between having an addiction and just being a recreational kind of guy who doesn't care what his wife thinks. There were a lot of people. It's interesting. There are a lot of people who come to me and are like, "Oh, I'm sure my husband's a porn addict. I'm sure my girlfriend's a porn addict. Will you see them?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I will." And I talk to this person for 10 minutes, and it's like, "No, this person is not an addict. They're just a really bad girlfriend or a really bad husband."
Yeah.
Not caring about the other person's wants or needs. That's not addiction. That's just kind of being an ass. And so that's what I deal with mostly now. I am starting to move back into the speaking circuit now that we're opening the world back up, whether that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
The more colleges, more churches, more libraries are
All
starting to
that.
book speakers again. So I'm starting to get booked at some of these events again. And
Nice.
I really, my goal is to not come out and be the anti-porn guy because that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Porn has been around since the beginning of mankind. Porn will always be around. It is natural and normal, especially at the times of puberty in our life, to be curious about sexuality, to be curious about nude bodies, to be curious about the act of sex with the type of person that we're attracted to, whether we're hetero, homo, whatever it is. And that all makes sense. So I don't want people to think that's wrong or that's bad. So I tell people I am not necessarily anti porn. What I am is pro education and pro healthy sexuality.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. And since you mentioned it, I kind of want to know the difference. What's the difference between a recreational user, let's say, who's just kind of like, one off, or and like the complete addict? Like, how would you define, or how would you separate the two?
If you want the quickest, crudest answer, is that recreational use takes place in the genitals, addicted use takes place in the brain.
Dude,
When
yeah,
I
that's
was when
dead.
I was using, it had nothing to do with any body parts. It had nothing to do with I mean, I think addicts addicts masturbate when they look at porn, and the ejaculation is the knowledge that the dopamine receptor got hit and you got what you needed. Um,
Yeah,
for the recreational user, it is a substitute for sex. When I was active in my addiction, I still had sex with my wife. I still enjoyed having sex with my wife, up until the very end when it got critical and I kind of lost my libido entirely. But yeah, I mean, because the act of making love, the act of being naked with another person, of expressing physical love that way, that's so different than what I was going for
yeah,
when I was sitting there looking at pornography. And at the very end, when I got really sick, I wasn't even there was no self-pleasuring, it was just watching, because self-pleasuring, it didn't happen. I had fried my dopamine receptors and the
receptors. Yeah,
oxytocin and all this. I had fried these to the point that it was pointless to sit there and masturbate at that point. I needed the pornography. I didn't need the masturbation, which is true for some guys, not true for others. And I shouldn't just say guys, because anybody can be a porn addict. Um,
yeah,
but no, it's one of these things where addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction. 95% of what happens from addiction to addiction is the same, and it happens in the brain.
gotcha.
Alcoholism doesn't take place in the liver, and food addiction doesn't take place in the stomach. It all takes place in the brain.
Yeah,
And we're all trying to fix what our brain is screaming at us to fix. And the only way we've learned to fix it to this point is our addictions. And then when you say something to us like, well, what we need you to do is stop the one thing that has always made you feel better, and you'll feel even better after a little while. And that sounds like a load of crap. How is it if I stop the one thing that makes me feel good, I'll feel better? That doesn't make sense. But
yeah,
then I went to rehab, and it occurred to me, I went twice, once for alcohol, once for porn and sex. And how is it that you get 30, 40 really broken people together, people who are at their lowest critical point, and it somehow works, and a lot of them get better with each other? It seems like it should just devolve into, horribleness, but
yeah.
the inpatient rehabilitation experience absolutely transformed me, absolutely changed my life, and allowed me to. It really helped everything else. It helped the research. It helped the 12-step groups. It helped the therapy back at home. And while I don't still do all of these at this point, almost 8 years later, I'm really glad that I was exposed to all of these modalities and allowed to figure out how to create my formula for recovery. And I think that's what most people need. It is that recovery. And I always say this: if you ask yourself if you have a pornography problem or a drug problem or a drinking problem, I always say, do you have an addiction to vacuuming? Do you ask yourself if you have an addiction to vacuuming? And the answer is no, because you don't, and you know it. If you're asking yourself if you have a problem with something, that should be enough of a red flag to look into it a little bit more and talk to somebody who's more of an expert, because you don't have a vacuuming problem. If you're
Yeah,
questioning your pornography, if you're questioning your drinking, your gambling, whatever it may be, it's time to at least talk to somebody and figure out where you are.
that's a solid observation. I mean, obviously that's a big red flag right there. And you mentioned some of the physical issues that started to come up. What were other issues that you would see physically? And what's like another thing that we can kind of start to tell, like loss of libido, erection
Loss of
problems?
loss of libido does happen with a lot of men, especially, but some libidos get charged. The
Really?
the the reality is that, and this is kind of interesting, 1 out of 5 men with a porn addiction will end up going outside of it, acting out, being with another person, whether they're married or not, but 1 out of 5. When it comes to women, almost 3 out of 4 who are porn addicts will act outside of that addiction and end up
Wow.
being with a guy. There are a bunch of different theories as to why.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I think it's as simple as you and I as guys, we go out to a bar, we can try as hard as we want to get laid that night. It just may not
Well,
happen.
yeah.
Any girl who goes to a bar, she can get laid. And if she says she can't, she does not understand reality and how guys really are. Because,
Yeah.
5 minutes to last call, a lot of people look good. Anyway, I think that people need to understand that, getting drunk once in a great while does not make you an alcoholic.
Yeah.
It's what, wanting to, watch a sexy movie or going to a strip club for a bachelor party doesn't make you a sex or porn addict. It's in the mind. It's really, are you thinking about this way too much? Are you planning your day around this? Is this
Mm,
starting to replace other things you used to enjoy, watching TV, hanging out with friends? You now use all your spare time or more spare time to it. And perhaps the biggest thing when you're wondering if, am I recreational or am I an addict, is do you make deals with yourself about not using? Oh, well, I'm not going to, and this is true with every addiction, I'm not going to touch this stuff for a week. And then 6 hours later, you're white knuckling and flipping out, and you need it.
your
If you
fix.
make if you make promises to yourself and you can't keep them, that's a big sign of addiction, and specifically pornography addiction. What I hear from, and it's kind of funny when I bring this up, every addict I've ever spoken was like, yeah, and that's the quest for the perfect piece of porn. So
Oh
many
yeah.
addicts sit down and they're like, okay, I've got 20-30 minutes here to look at porn and pleasure myself. And then it's an hour, then it's 2 hours. And I've heard stories from guys who are like, I have to be at my kids' school to pick them up in 3 hours. And at 2 hours and 55 minutes, I'm still masturbating in front of the computer, vigorously trying to just get that dopamine hit, which
Jeez.
coincides with the orgasm, and they can't get it. And so those are all really good signs that there's an issue here beyond just recreational porn use, which the reality is a lot of people can just be recreational porn users. A lot of people can be recreational drinkers. I'm not one of these people, but on the other hand, I like cake, but I'm not a food addict. I enjoy going to Vegas, but I'm not a gambling addict.
Gambling, yeah.
We all are built differently, and have to listen to our bodies and listen to our brains, and hear what it is our brains are telling us we want, because it's not just you're straight or you have a horrible addiction. To me, it's a routine, and then it's a habit, and then it's a bad habit, and then it's a compulsion, and then it's an addiction. And if
Yeah.
you can pay attention to some of your behaviors, like a lot of people will tell me, well, my drinking rose up to this level, then I pulled it back, and I have to be careful. Sometimes it picks up more. And as long as you understand kind of that staircase, you can pay more attention to what's going on. And I do that all the time still. Sometimes if I'm working too much and I've got some projects I'm really into, is
Yeah.
my workaholism kicking in? What's going on? Because I tend to obsess easily. And the fact that I obsess over my work, I'm the same kid who obsessed over baseball cards. I'm the same kid who obsessed over speed running Zelda on Super Nintendo when I was a kid,
Yeah.
faster than any of my friends. I've always had that bit of an addictive personality, a compulsive personality. And the key for me was to get through the trauma stuff, because addiction is not the ultimate problem. The ultimate problem is what made you become an addict. And for
Yeah.
most of us, it's childhood trauma. We did not have the tools, we did not have the skills to cope with our trauma or the traumatizing events happening when we were young. So we built up walls, and then along the way we found these panaceas, these crutches, and fall victim to them until later on when it's like, oh, this is making things even worse than the thing that I'm running from did.
Yeah.
And you have to go through that process. And then, it's ultimately, I tell people, addictions are like Band-Aids. They hide cuts very well, but they don't cure them. They don't help them.
No.
And you
Yeah.
need to rip that Band-Aid off and deal with the wound. In this case of addiction, the wound is that trauma. Once you heal your trauma like that, once you heal your unattended trauma, it doesn't go away. It's just attended. It's just resolved. The trauma's still there. You still have a scar, but you no longer need to put a Band-Aid over it. The Band-Aid is pointless. So
Exactly.
when I do my coaching with people, I always tell them, I'm going to work with you about 25% on your addiction and developing tools for the cravings, for the triggers. That's important to do now. But more importantly is to figure out why you became this way in the first place. Because if we can figure that out, if we can solve that, then you won't need the addictions because you have your answers. And that was absolutely the case for me. Once I knew what happened when I was a kid, once I synthesized how that had made me into the man that I was, well, I didn't need the porn and the alcohol nearly as much to make me feel better. Yeah, there were still triggers. Yeah, I still wanted to drink, and every once in a while, I went to a Major League Baseball park for the first time in my recovery in 10 years.
Wow.
This past September, and walking down the street, I live near Boston, and
Okay.
so I went to Fenway Park, and I'm walking down the street with my brother. I'm 45 now, he's 42, and I'm saying to him, he's like, "Are you having any? Are you twitching at all? What are you feeling?" And I was like, "I'm just walking around thinking, oh my God, I remember getting hammered at that bar. I remember getting hammered at that bar. I remember I once missed half a game because I stayed there and hung out with some people in that bar instead of going to the game. I mean, I've probably gone to over 100 games in my life, but
Yeah.
from 18 or 19 straight up through my last visit, I was almost always hammered. So last month or 2 months ago, whenever it was that I went to Fenway Park, it was like I felt those little twitches because I hadn't been there in a sober capacity
Yeah.
since I was probably 15 years old. So that kind of stuff still crops up of old habits. But once you develop and understand why, what was the trauma, what was the abuse, why did it happen, how did it make you form your opinions and outlooks, once you figure that out, it's not that hard to say no to that stuff. Or I shouldn't say it's not that hard. It's just so much easier because you understand why you needed it. And once you resolve it, you don't need it.
And I guess that's kind of the freeing thing because it sounds like now you're truly liberated from it, right? And I think that's the one thing that everybody's always looking for. They're looking for an escape.
Well, and you know what the true liberation is? I don't have to lie about it anymore. I
Dude,
don't have to
yeah.
pretend it's not there because with alcohol, you can lie about it, but you slur your words, you walk funny. It's not as easy to hide alcoholism as a drunk person thinks. And but with porn addiction, it's pretty darn simple. You just have to have somebody not catch you looking at it. That's all.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to do that. And that's why when I'm coaching partners, I have to tell them, in my case, I became a porn addict at 12 years old. I met my wife at 26. How could I be a porn addict for 14 years and then her make me a worse porn addict? It had nothing to do with her. I hid it from her for another, 10 years after we got married.
Gee,
And
yeah.
easy. She knew I was a drunk. She hated when I drove drunk. She got really angry at me. And right, she also had an attitude towards pornography that a lot of women have, which is it's not that big a deal, and guys will be guys, and whatever. And I think that's the attitude a lot of people have. She just, with that attitude, it was even easier for me to hide the fact because, oh my goodness, if I left my browser up and there was porn there, she was, oh, what are you looking at? It's like, oh,
No
Girls
big
Gone
deal.
Wild. Yeah, Girls Gone
Yeah.
Wild. Oh man, I've seen those commercials on TV, and that's like, okay, we're done. And that was the way it was for a long time. So it was easy to hide, and that's part of the problem with things like gambling addiction, porn addiction, video game addiction,
Yeah.
sex addiction. These are what are process addictions. They're not chemical addictions. Chemical, uh, makes itself apparent a lot faster.
Yeah.
These process ones don't, and they can stick with you, and that's where you can get into trouble. Because if you, like myself, I didn't know pornography addiction was a real thing. I thought I made really bad decisions when I was drunk that involved pornography. To me, that's all that was. And it wasn't until I got to talk to some smart people who were professionals and a bunch of people who had been through it and been successful before me that I got to understand the full picture of what was going on.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, it all makes perfect sense when you look at it in retrospect. But then again, hindsight's always 2020, right? The one
Isn't it
thing,
beautiful that way?
the one thing I was going to ask you though, it's now that we live in this overstimulated society, and I know for myself, the first time I ever saw porn, it was in a magazine, right? And it was a little
Yeah.
bit more difficult to get. I remember
Oh
back
yeah.
in the day, you'd have to go get a cassette or whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
now that it's all over the place, what do you see in the future coming up with these younger generations that are just being overstimulated from everything? Because it seems like it's
Um,
totally different.
Oh, it is because, when you and I grew up, like you said, you had to find a magazine. And they were behind the counter at the
Oh,
7-Eleven wrapped in
yeah.
plastic. And you had to rent a videotape. And not only, Blockbuster didn't have those kinds of videotapes, and the mom and pops were starting to die out. I found one. I at 14, 15 years old, I found a mom and pop store that would rent me porno videos, and I found a mom and pop convenience store that would sell me beer. So I would literally like ride my bike home from school, stop off, get a couple porno tapes, stop off and buy some beers. And I never bought a six pack, never had the balls to do that. I'd always take like 3 or 4 bottles from the cooler and bring them up. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess like a guy who mixes in a magazine and gum with his condoms or something, hoping nobody
Yeah.
notices. Um, and I so that was my day largely every day. But I think about the kids today, and if you're old enough to spell, woman screws horse, you can literally see a woman screwing a horse. You and I couldn't even find that stuff in a
Oh,
magazine when we were
no.
younger. And now these kids have unfettered access to this stuff. And I think what's happening is that we live in a world, people who are kind of your and my generation, you're in my age group. I know you're a little younger than me, but we have parents and grandparents who were very Puritan like.
Oh, yeah.
Sex was a taboo, nudity was a taboo. My mom was a hardcore Catholic. I could watch Rambo, I could watch Apocalypse Now, I could watch Platoon, I could watch any of these movies, but my God, doesn't matter if it's a guy or a girl, somebody's butt is on TV, or
Ooh,
God forbid you see a breast. Oh, change the channel, change the channel, change the channel.
taboo. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so killing people is okay, but seeing a butt is not. Well, I'm curious about this butt thing.
Yeah.
If she's freaking out so much, I need to see more of these breasts she doesn't want me to see.
Exactly.
And that was my upbringing, and I think that was the way that our grandparents and parents grew up. Then you've got these, I think, kind of 2 generations younger than us right now,
Yeah.
and they are far more liberal. And I think we are kind of in the middle. We are Generation X, Generation Y, whatever it is. And all we did was look at our parents and say, oh my God, you guys are wrong. And then we look at our kids or our grandkids and we look at them and, oh, they're trying to save the world. Our generation just stood by and watched it burn.
Oh,
We
yeah.
watched our parents burn the world, and now we're hoping our kids will save it. And we just stood here going, oh, wow, what a mess. And while we stood there saying, wow, what a mess, we were introduced to the internet 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And how did we know what was going to happen? You know, if you'd have said, okay, there are going to be no more phone books, no more encyclopedias, no
Oh
more
yeah.
travel agents, you know, we're going to kill this industry and this industry, people wouldn't have ever believed it. Or telling them what social media would have done to the world, we wouldn't have even understood the concept 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And we now are starting to have statistics about what this unfettered access to pornography has done to our uh, youngest adult generation. There's a I could say it's a great statistic, but it's a scary statistic from a group called the Barna Group, which
Okay.
does surveys and whatnot out of Texas. And this was pre-pandemic, keep in mind. I think it was 2017 they came up with this. They interviewed thousands of men in the US, all ages, all ethnicities, right across the board. And what they found was that in the 18 to 30-year-old group, 32 to 33% of men in the US said they either watch too much porn, they are likely developing a problem with pornography, or they
Wow.
think they have a full blown addiction to pornography. So that's roughly 1 in 3 men between 18 and 30. And this statistic is 5 years old now. So I'm going to guess these guys are now 35, and soon they'll be 40, and then they'll be 50. Now, these guys and gals, I feel very bad for, because they are at a point where they have to get help on a one-on-one basis at this time. What we need to do is look at the next generation. Let's look at those who are under 18. What can we do proactively, preemptively, to teach them about pornography, to teach them about proper use of pornography, and not make it a scary thing, not make it a puritanical thing.
Yeah.
And really, when I talk to parents, the thing that gets them the most, or I see the lights go on in their eyes, is when I tell them this is not the birds and the bees speech. You don't have to, you don't have to give a 6-year-old the birds and the bees speech. This is the don't touch alcohol, don't touch cigarettes speech. And when you're 6 years old, you can tell your 6-year-old kid, hey, if you are using a computer or your tablet, or one of your friends has their phone and you see naked people on it, just come and let mommy and daddy know. Little kids aren't supposed to see that kind of stuff, so just let us know, okay? Kids like direction. Kids like to learn. Kids want to do the right thing. And you know what? Maybe next year you say to them, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, if anybody ever tries to take a picture of you in your underwear or without your bathing suit on, you come and let me know. You let us know. But also, you can't take pictures of anybody with their bathing suit off or in
Yeah.
their underwear. You can't. You're not allowed to do that either." Okay, I won't do that. And I think that we can take these steps leading up to talking to 13 and 14-year-olds in more graphic terms. I think
Yeah.
we need to let these boys know that too much of this stuff and you risk the calamity of essentially breaking your penis and making it not work. And we see erectile dysfunction and porn induced erectile dysfunction figures of men in their late teens and early 20s that are 3,000 times worse than they were prior to high speed internet. So it's obviously a correlation there. Some of the 4-year-old guy, and he had a 20-year playing in the room. He could get to the point of finishing, but he needed pornography playing. And that's what happens with porn induced erectile dysfunction, is that essentially you can only finish if you're watching pornography.
Wow.
And his girlfriend was starting to get sick of that, because they had to have the laptop or a phone in their room. She then figured out that, well, here's what we can do. You sit in the bedroom with your phone, I'll be in the living room with the laptop, and they would have a sexting session. And because his brain was wired the way it was, or rewired the way it was, seeing his girlfriend, despite the fact he'd had sex with her, hundreds of times, despite the fact he'd seen her naked hundreds of times, he could look at her on a screen, and that was pornography to his brain. So they would have a sexting session, and right before he was ready to finish, give some signal, and she would run in, and they would finish like, she always said normal people. And the reason they came to me, and this was a year and a half ago, or maybe even 2 years ago, it was a while. And she said, it occurs to me that if we're going to have a family, our kid would have to be conceived with porn playing in the room. And I don't want that to be the case. And it was like, whoa,
That's sobering.
that is a 21st century problem, if I've ever heard one. But I get it. I get it. She was a very cool lady. She was a nursing student. She understood addiction. She didn't shame him. She didn't, come down on him hard. She knew what was going on in his life. But the reality was, his penis was still broken. He still had massive issues because he looked at too much porn when he was young, and he developed that addiction before he ever wanted. And I think if we tell more 13 and 14-year-old boys about this, a 13 or 14-year-old boy, whether they are into boys or girls or whatever, they just want that other person in their life. When I was 14, I wanted a girlfriend. I wanted somebody to watch movies with and talk to on the phone, and yes, kiss, and yes, maybe if she let me, have sex with her. That's what I wanted when I was 14 or 15. But if you can't get that, a lot of guys who do use porn as a substitute for sex start to look at porn. I mean, guys, on average, a guy sees porn the first time at 8 or 9. He starts watching regularly at 12 or 13. And I think, if we tell these guys, hey, we understand why you want to watch this, just be careful, because here's what can happen. And while this couple is still together and this guy is doing so much better than he was, there were still problems. And it's wonderful that she stuck with him, and she is sticking with him. But there are a lot of relationships that get broken up because of porn, because of sexual dysfunction, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault, because this was a kid at 13, 14 who didn't get the love at home that he wanted, was very awkward with people, and he found solace in masturbation to pornography. And when that's the only place you're feeling love and you want love, not to mention all the hormones rushing through your system at 14, well, you'll watch porn and masturbate all day long if you're able to. And that's what he was able to do, but it had horrible repercussions. And we need to tell guys about that at 13 or 14. Maybe that will stop them. And that's sort of why that's kind of why I'm doing all of this, is because I just wonder, is there anything that 10-year-old Josh or 15-year-old Josh could have been told that would stop? I became an alcoholic. Maybe I was predestined to have that happen because I knew what the issues were with it, but I didn't become a drug addict. I didn't become an addict of 100 other things because I knew it was bad and there was never a pull towards it. Is there anything I could have been told? Is there anything I could have been shown that didn't make me go down this road? I don't blame my parents, because nobody knew anything about pornography really back then. It was just, everybody just walked around, oh, perverts, look at that, just despite the fact most people did anyway. Thankfully, we're a more open society today, but I worry that with these people under 30, with now 1 out of 3 of the guys being porn addicts, are we now going from our parents and grandparents being way too conservative to swinging the other way? And now that we have this high-speed internet, way too liberal. And we need to find a healthy place in the middle. Because think about, when you and I were in high school, we didn't know what social media was.
Nope.
No idea what social media was. Didn't exist. If we were in high school and there was a photo of like the super hot sexy cheerleader and the super buff quarterback at the beach together, and she's in her bikini and he's just in his little short shorts, in my high school, that thing would have been passed around like currency. I got to see that. Did you see the picture? Oh, I got to see the picture. Well, nowadays, think about this. There are, 15 and 16-year-old kids are pretty much expected to have these half-naked photos of themselves on Instagram. And if you're 15, 16, 17, and you've been putting photos of yourself in a skimpy little bikini for everybody to see and comment on for the last few years, and somebody suddenly comes to you and says, well, there's this one site where if you just pop that bikini top off, you can charge $10 a photo, and you don't have to go work at the mall, or you don't have to go be a waitress because you're going to make hundreds of dollars a day. Well, if you've had unending access to as much pornography in the world as you want to look at, if everybody around you doesn't have these taboos about nudity and sex, if you're of a younger age where you tend to turn your back on the beliefs of older generations anyway, well, and then you have something like the pandemic come in at the same time that OnlyFans arrives,
Oh man.
or these campsites arrive. Well, this is the perfect storm. And this is how you see a younger society. People over 35, 40 years old, 90% of them don't know what OnlyFans is. Yet you talk to 25-year-olds, 20, 25-year-olds, OnlyFans is part of their everyday culture.
Yeah.
And it's just a normal thing that these people do. And I think that I don't know that either of them are ultimately healthy places to be. And I think that's maybe why our generation is a little bit kind of lost and in the middle. And that's mainly who I deal with in my coaching, whether it's a man, woman, a partner, or an addict, is our kind of middle generation that is lost and torn between these other two generations. And the pandemic has just made it, even more challenging to figure out what's good, what's bad, what's healthy, what's unhealthy.
Well, it's weird too, because I mean, societal norms, it seems like OnlyFans and all these different weird platforms, well, not weird, but just like overly liberal platforms are just readily accepted now. And I was going to ask you, what do you think is going to happen kind of with like the moral fabric of society, I guess? Because it seems like we're moving into a direction of like pure liberalism, hedonism. It just, I don't know. I'm like, what do you think
Get,
long term?
I'm a big believer in history, and I've studied a lot of history, and it comes and goes. It's cyclical. People are talking about right now, the whole Donald Trump, dividing the country and
Oh,
all our
yeah.
divisiveness and all the politics going on, and then we get the racial strife going on, and
Oh,
just
yeah.
we're getting so divided. You really want to read about division? Go back and read about the time of the first three presidents, from Washington to Adams to Jefferson, and especially if you want to read a good book, read the Hamilton biography that the play was based on.
Gotcha.
And you're going to read about some horrible politics. You're going to read about nasty politics because they didn't have rules about the press back then. Libel and slander didn't exist back then. And you read this stuff, oh my God, these people were vicious. These people were nasty. Nothing has changed, even though, we like to believe, because we're the current generation, that
Modern
we are
society.
snowflakes and, oh my God, this is worse than it's ever been. And, no, it's not. And, you can go back to Caligula and Roman times of
Yeah.
hedonism, and you will find times that go up and go down and go up and go down. And interestingly enough, if you look over the last 120, 25 years, the two industries that always glom on to new technology are pornography and pro wrestling. And why is this? It's because we are always looking for new ways to watch or experience sex and violence. And you can go back to that, throwing the Christians to the lions and
Gladiators.
gladiator fights,
Yeah.
and meanwhile, you've also got these, let's not pretend Game of Thrones was just watched for the dragons. There was plenty of hedonistic activity going
Yeah.
on during that time. So I don't worry too much about that, because I think that, like everything else in life, things are cyclical. And I think that, these kids who are being so liberal right now with their bodies, I bet you anything their grandkids will be like, I cannot believe that my grandparents just, put up naked pictures of themselves and charged $5 each for them.
Yeah.
But that's the society we live in now. And it sucks, but we have to let our kids know this is the society, and we have to give them the tools to navigate the society. In the 1950s, they told kids, hide under your desk. We're having an air raid drill.
No.
If the Germans or the Japanese or whoever we were afraid of, or the Russians, were going to come and drop nuclear bombs on the school, Don't worry, your desk will protect you.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Oh my God, that would have scared the crap out of me. That would have put me into PTSD land for the rest of my school career. It's great that we don't do that anymore because we
Yeah.
don't have to. But we now live in a world where pornography and access to pornography is greater and more extreme than it ever has been. So we need to almost have that instruction manual to use along with it. And that's why I say, I don't come out trying to fight porn because that's stupid. You go back to the beginning of time and mankind, was it Mesopotamia? There are cave drawings that are pretty sexual. You go to any great museum and go to the ancient medieval history, look at the Egyptian vases and
Oh
from
yeah.
that part of the world. Oh my God, there's some triple X stuff on there. Still the greatest sex manual ever made in the world comes from the conservative country of India, and
Kama
it's
Sutra.
thousands
Yeah.
of years old, and it has better positions than anything that's showing on Playboy Channel right now. It's never going to go anywhere. So when I see people try to fight pornography, I just shake my head, because if we could have fought it, we would have done it in the 60s and 70s. They made their arguments then. The arguments don't work for getting people to stop watching. Trafficking is a horrible thing. It's criminal. It shouldn't happen, and it has never stopped one person from looking at porn. And the poor porn stars who are, horrible upbringings and daddy issues and, and just perverts. And, they're all doing this for drugs. And well, you know what? Walk into the back of any TGI Fridays, and I guarantee you, I just described half the people there. It's not like porn stars have a corner on the market of bad childhoods and dead end lives. There's a lot of people out there who have it. There is no argument that I've ever heard that stops people from looking at porn when you appeal to social justice, when you appeal to something like that. So instead of saying nobody's going to watch porn, let's accept the fact they are. Now, if you want to try to dissuade somebody from watching porn, there are great arguments. Ultimately, pornography, every bit of pornography, from the nastiest of the nasty to what people now call ethical pornography, it is all about reducing somebody to body parts and
Yeah.
judging them based on body parts. And if you're okay with that, hey, that's you. You do your thing. But that's what it is at the core: 100% objectifying of another person. And as far as younger people, I have had this. I was woken up to this on the very last time I appeared at a college, which was nearly almost 2 years ago now because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I went to a health center, and I spoke with a women's sexuality group at a college here in Maine. And as I gave my little 30-minute presentation, went into the Q&A, and this one kind of meek woman held up her hand, and I said, yeah, what can I answer for you? And she was probably 20, I'd guess. And she said, have you heard a lot about women our age, college girls, who don't want to have sex with virgin guys? And I was like, no, I haven't. I could see why, but what are you talking about? What does this have to do with porn? And she said, well, you just said the average guy looks at porn at the age of 8 or 9, and he's watching it daily. The average kid by 12, 13 years old. And I immediately shot back to that story of that couple, and I realized, oh my God, I know where she's going with this.
He's so
And
addicted to it.
but not just that though, not necessarily, because just think about it. Even if you don't become an addict, if you're an average guy, let's say if you watched two porno clips every day from 12 to 18, geez, that's tens of thousands of porno clips you watched. And nobody just watches two. I mean, let's be honest, nobody just watches two. People
No.
watch dozens at a time. And so think about this. Think about this for the especially the boys of today. They start watching porn very regularly at 13. That's their sex ed. That
Yeah.
is their sexual education. for people who have not been in healthy sexual relationships or even just healthy relationships like you and I have, porn could really be seen as a documentary if nobody sets them straight. And let's be honest, we know it's not. We know it's not a reality show, but this woman started talking, and then we got into this discussion, and I've had this discussion with many women since. I was just visiting my son at college this last weekend, and I got into this discussion with a couple females there just to find out where their heads were at, and they absolutely agreed. What's interesting about the explosion of pornography, it hasn't really affected the age that people lose their virginity, which is good, I guess. And for guys who end up getting college degrees lose their virginity a little later than a guy who doesn't. Quite often it's their senior year of high school or first year or two of college. Now, imagine you're this guy who's 18 years old. You finally met a woman at college who's willing to have sex with you, and you've never done this before. You get back to your room or her room, you're alone, and then all of a sudden, well, you're going to have sex. Well, how are you going to act? Well,
and reenact what they've seen.
Absolutely. You are going to, and I've heard some really out there stories of this guy who is a meek guy who is, flustered that he can't figure out his next chess move as part of the chess club, suddenly grabs her by the throat and throws her on the bed. And, starts calling her all kinds of dirty names and, feels that they can bend the woman into any position. And you know what, if they don't get to finish on their face, that's not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things where it's like, dude, this is not how people have sex. And these women know this, but they don't, and because they don't want to be treated that way. But these guys think that's how you have sex. And so this doesn't even have to do with addiction, but this has to do with pornography in society and what it's doing today. All these guys who are trying to act like John Holmes or that tubby one who just got arrested.
Ron Jeremy, yeah.
Ron Jeremy, yeah. He's going to rot in jail the rest of his life. Anyway, when you have these guys as your teachers or your role models, that's how you're going to act. And these women who have now been dealing with this and probably have older sisters and older cousins that have warned them about this, now they don't want to be with virgin men because they know there is a good chance it's going to be some amateur porn hour, and they don't want to have to retrain the guy and be like, no, you know what? As it turns out, most people don't have threesomes. As it turns out, most people don't have anal sex. As it turns out, most people don't lift each other in the air and spin around when they're having sex. That's not how normal people do it. And it's funny because you and I are so beyond that, and you and I didn't grow up in that world.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what's happening down at that level, down at that age. And nobody knows about it because who's in charge of the world? It's still our parents for the most part at the top levels who are so puritanical. They're not going to talk about this stuff. Forget even talking about pornography. They still hate talking about mental health because they still come from the generation of, if I can't see the boo-boo, you don't have a boo-boo.
Hey, you should be just fine. Walk it off.
Yep. Yeah. Rub dirt on it.
But it's interesting because, we were talking about societal norms, and that's one thing I'd never considered. And I guess from a lot of these ladies' standpoint, where, she can obviously tell that this isn't the way that it's supposed to happen. And you probably got a guy who's trying to bust off in her face, like, this is completely normal. And I can see where that would go wrong and why it would rub her the wrong way.
Well, one of the things that's kind of funny, I'm not going to get too graphic here, but when I've talked to college guys, I'm like, okay, how many guys do you think are ever in a threesome in their life? And these guys like, I don't know, half, maybe 75%. It's like, no, it's about 15%. How many guys do you think have anal sex with a girl anytime in their life? Oh, God, I don't know, 80%? No, that's about 21%. Because that's not how things really happen in most cases. Hey, if you end up that way, if you find you want to go that way and you meet a partner who wants to do that and you're both cool with it and you're one of those rare birds who can manage that lifestyle, hey, if it's all consensual and it's all within each other's boundaries, go for it. but that's rare. That's very, very rare.
Yeah, I mean, but that's kind of the thing. I guess I've never really paid attention too much because I guess I've been out of that game for a long, long
Right.
time.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
know, but it's interesting because now it begs the question, like, what direction are they going to be going in the near future? Because it's only getting more extreme, right? And talk to some of these
Well,
young guys, and they just want to bounce around from hole to hole. I'm like,
yeah,
no, man.
but think about addiction though. And I look back at myself. You know, I remember the days when 4 beers would get me drunk. And then I remember the days when 12 beers wouldn't. And then I remember the days that I had to switch from beer to tequila because that's all that it would do for me. And suddenly it wasn't, 4 shots of tequila. Suddenly it was half a bottle that I needed. So the thing is, like all addictions escalate. The gambling addict starts betting $20 a hand, then 50, then 100, just to feel the same thing that they used to,
Feel the
because they
rush.
fry their dopamine receptors, and you have to just keep flooding and it's dopamine, it's oxytocin, there's 6 chemicals in there that actually do all the work. But you get to this point where it has to be more and more extreme. One guy and one girl having sex stopped doing it for me probably at about 15 years old. So and you look at any porn site now and you look down the genres
No,
and it's like,
dude, yeah.
holy crap. But the fact is, it's so much cheaper to produce porn now. It's so much cheaper to distribute porn now that you don't have to make a lot of, you don't have to have nearly as many people watching it as you once did to make money.
Yeah.
So or actually, it's to say the 3 biggest groups that are seeing growth in pornography addiction statistics. Number 1 is straight white women. Number 2 is straight black men. And number 3 is a tie between members of the Catholic churches and the LDS church. And when you think about these 3 groups, porn was not geared toward them, and access to porn was not geared towards them in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. What could the porn producers out in Hollywood trust? That the straight white man would buy their stuff. If you tried to make it for a woman or tried to make it for a black guy or a Latino guy, well, white guys may not buy that. White guys may not be interested in black women or Latino women. So you've got to try to get the biggest audience possible. Well, now that you don't have to go to a porno theater, you don't have to go to a video store. You can just sit here in front of your computer and watch porn literally till the end of your life and never watch the same thing twice. Um,
Yeah.
that it turns out, gee, black guys have equipment just like white guys, and girls have genitals just like men. And it doesn't matter what God you pray to or how you pray to, because you've got genitals too, because sexuality goes through everything. The only reason you and I are here is because while we may not want to think about it, our
Yep.
parents got busy one night. And, and can you only imagine what your dad asked for that your mom said no to?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I'll just let that stick with you today. Um,
Today's
but
thought of the day.
yeah, this is the thought of the day that you're gonna get nauseous of over. But the thing is, sexuality is a great thing. It's a natural thing. It's a wonderful thing. But because of technology these days, because we don't even know the effects of technology these days,
Yeah.
and what's going to happen, that we need to be a little more cautious. We need to have more conversations. And I you and I have been talking for nearly an hour. We have
Yeah.
not got, I don't think we've even got R rated, much less X rated. You
No.
can talk about pornography as a concept, and we all know what you're talking about. And the reality is, when you look at men under 50, 80% look at pornography and masturbate at least once a month. Under 50 for women, 60% look at pornography and
Wow.
masturbate at least once a month. So you are more rare if you're not under 50 and not looking at pornography and masturbating once a month. Doesn't matter your color, doesn't matter your religion, your marital status, how many kids you have. We all have working boy and girl parts, and they like certain things, and sometimes we mix that into addiction and into our compulsions, and it goes out of hand like it did for me and like it has for so many millions. I really worry about where this world is headed, and I think the only way that we are going to dial this back is to teach the people of our generation and slightly younger than us who are
Yeah.
having kids now that, okay, we need to start talking about this. We need to, if they're willing to do a day of anti-drug talk in school and a day of anti-cigarette talk, you can
Mental health.
yeah, and you can talk about this. You can even, you teach sex and health. Okay, well, make this a 5-minute speech. Pornography can be addictive. Be careful if you use it. It can be like anything else.
Yeah.
Those 5 sentences aren't said in school these days. If you said those, could we bump down the national average by 1%? Because if we could, for addiction stats, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who won't end up addicted. But because we're afraid to talk about sex, we're afraid to talk about nudity. And I think the big thing about pornography is we're afraid to talk about some of those weird little things that live in the back of our head that we don't want to admit. Sometimes we like to get that itch scratched. And hey, for some people, it's transgender porn. For some people, it's porn with old people. There's so much weird porn out there that you're going to find something for whatever weird issue you have. And God forbid you look at it, or you look at it. God forbid somebody else finds out that, oh my God, you watched somebody, piss on another person and you kind of thought it was hot. Oh, I can't let anybody know that. So no, I never look at this stuff ever, never, never, ever, never. And I'm not going to talk to my kid about it because good Lord, I don't want them ended up looking at people peeing on each other. When, you know what, while that is not normal, dinner party conversation,
still exists.
It still exists. It's part of who we are. Some people are turned on by that. Some people are turned on by food. Some people are turned on by having sex in nature. We all have our little things, and we need to learn that they don't make you a pervert. They don't make you a bad person. They don't make you evil. We all have our little things. And if we can accept that and understand that, at least if one of those little things is pornography, that there probably should be more education behind it of the potential pitfalls.
100% agreed. And Josh, where can my listeners and everybody in general, where can we find you at? Social media? What's your website and all that?
Website is P as in porn, or P as in post-betrayal trauma, or penguin or pickles. I can help you with those addictions too. It's paddictrecovery.com. And really simple for my social media, Twitter, Instagram. That's also P Addict Recovery.
Gotcha.
So just if you hit paddictrecovery.com, you can learn about my coaching. You can learn about the books I've written. I've done 3. I have an online course for partners, and I try to write 1 or 2 articles a week, either about addiction or about recovery. There's a big list of resources. So if you have any issues or concerns surrounding porn addiction, sex addiction, betrayal trauma, I think my site can help you. Again, that's paddictrecovery.com, and it links to everything under the sun that has my name on it.
Awesome. Look forward to reading more about that. And Josh, thank you for coming on today. And we will talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Hey. And I appreciate it, dude, because you know what? I have the message, but you have the medium, and they need both of us. And I'll tell you, of my clients who I coach, probably almost half have told me they first heard me on a podcast. And without the hosts, without the producers, I can't do that. So thank you so much for giving me this time.
No worries. I can't wait until next time, man.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's talk to you later, man.
All right. Bye.